Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 19th of July 2023. Sorry it's taken me a little bit of extra time to get this one out because I'm just trying to check the maps and see what's going on. It's a very time-consuming thing to try and work out what is going on in the middle of a war between two sides who are either not putting out information on purpose or trying to put out information that skews the narrative, so on and so forth. I think the TLDR of this, the kind of short summary, is that Russia are putting up quite a bit of resistance, the Russian forces, in quite a few places around the front line, including in the south, where the Ukrainians are ostensibly on a counter-offensive, doing their probing attacks, but actually the Russians are defending by attacking. And that is interesting because actually they are almost doing more attacks than the Ukrainians are at the moment, and potentially making more gains than the Ukrainians around the front line in different areas. Where should we go to first? Let's go to what has happened. I mentioned this in the news piece this morning. Some Chechen fighters have ambushed, pro-Ukrainian Chechen fighters have ambushed a truck in the Belgorod region and taking it out. That is in or near the village of Sareda, just to let you know where that is. So on my map, we have Ukraine, Crimea, Kharkiv, and then to the north of the Kharkiv Oblast, we have this little pocket of Russian land here, and there's that village there. So a truck somewhere in that area has been attacked by those fighters. Now, the Chechen fighters using, I presume, non-Western, obviously non-Western provided kit. I talked about how there could be this theory, and well, there is a theory, and it could be correct, that the Russian volunteer battalions who were overtly using Humvees and other Western provided aid attacking into Russia wasn't a good look for some of those countries, and so they've had a word and they put a stop to that. So that could be why we haven't seen the Russian volunteer units, but there are Chechen fighters doing similar things in the Russian within the Russian borders. Now, as we come to look at what's going on in this northeastern sector from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna, I'm not showing you Syriac maps is red line today because they haven't mapped for 4 days, and so I don't think it's, for whatever reason, so I don't think it's particularly as relevant. I will keep the defensive line from the 30th of May from Deep State, so you can see what the lines were before the counter-offensive started. Now, as you can see up here, there's this area. Andrew Perpetua's actually has it as a large area that the Russians have taken. So the blue line is Andrew Perpetua's Russian defensive line. And he showed yesterday that they had taken all of this area. But he was quick to note that this area was grey zone. Oops, it was grey zone where there was no one having overall control. In fact, the Ukrainians are behind the river here. As you can see, I talked about this yesterday. You've got higher ground behind the Oskil River. And in this Maziotivka area, you've got this forest area where the Ukrainians had maybe some kind of presence in this grey area, but were pushed back, or the Russians just pushed into the grey area, grey zone with no one there. And then they have now got control over this. But he was saying that it's not definite control. And also most of these trees have just basically been obliterated. Yeah, Russians have control over Liman Pershi, although he was saying also that there were MOD claimed that they were attacking Liman Pershi. So yeah, who knows? But I think that yes, the Russians are putting pressure in this area, but losing this amount of ground isn't losing Ukrainian controlled ground. It is losing a grey zone. So it's worth mentioning that. But certainly there is this activity taking place again up in that very northern part of this Luhansk to Kharkiv front line. Just before we go on, actually, I just want to note that this has just come out. Russians are apparently using T-14 Armatas on the front line somewhere. That's according to a source close to the Russian MOD. So we might see them popping up in the near future. Just in terms of what has been going on in this Kupiansk direction, the offensive of the Russians on the Kupiansk direction has been unsuccessful, says the Deputy Defense Minister, Hanna Malia. Fighting continues, but the initiative is on the Ukrainian side. There was an advance of Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut. It continues. And Russian assault in the Kupiansk direction is halted. Initiative is on the Ukrainian side. There was a big thread that I shared with you this morning about this Kupiansk frontline, Kupiansk to Kreminna frontline, and about how it isn't that 100,000 troops are being sent to this area. It is that there are 100,000 troops already there. There's possibly been maybe 10,000, 11,000 Russian troops, fairly decent troops, as in not Storm Z, but proper assault troops, are now in this area. How they'll be used, I don't know. The Ukrainians have got a decent force concentration along this front line too. That's why it's been something of a stalemate for some time. But certainly the Russians are trying to prod and probe here, and the reason is to divert attention away from particularly Bakhmut. At least that is what is being presented at the moment. So if we go to the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, they say the Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces advanced up to 2 kilometers along the front end, up to 1.5 kilometers in depth in an unspecified area in the Kupiansk direction. That's almost certainly going to be this area here. They're also shelling Dvorichna routinely. If we look at the distance, how wide is that? That's about 1.5 kilometers wide. And I wonder how long. Let's do another one. Yeah, about two and a half kilometers, 3 kilometers. Yeah, that's exactly that area there that we were talking about. As although it's unspecified, that's what they're referring to. Okay, so to continue, several Russian mobile bloggers claim that Russian forces, including Storm Z assault detachments, took control over the remainder of Novoselivska. I have no confirmation of this. Novoselivska is down here to the northeast of Svatova, Kuzmivka, Novoselivska. They're fighting over this small settlement there to the west of the railway and the road. It could be that the Ukrainians are struggling in that area, but again, no confirmation. And I haven't heard anything about Adiivka again today. So this is this. If we come further down past Svatova, this is the Zherebets River down here, and it looks like the Russians have got a foothold on the western side of the river. So here's a river coming down there at Adiivka. They now control this forest area. The Ukrainians control this forest area and actually tried to do a counterattack across here into the Russian-controlled forest, but that failed. So they remain where they are, and the Russians do have that foothold to the west of the river, which is, again, a little bit of a worry. I go back to the ISW. A Russian military blogger claimed that Russian forces advanced 3 kilometers west of Liman Pershi. Yeah, that's what we talked about there in the Kupiansk direction. And Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces unsuccessfully attacked west of Liman Pershi. So the Ukrainians are trying to sell that as a not so successful. Russian mail blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are transferring reserves to the area to counterattack and defend against Russian advances. Ukrainian Eastern Group Forces spokesperson Cherevati reported that Russia has concentrated over 100,000 personnel along the entire Kharkiv to Luhansk front line. Right, and then we come down to geolocated footage published on the July the 18th shows Russian forces have made marginal advances northwest of Dubrova. So Dubrova is, as we come to the south, there's a lot of activity still around Terny, Torska, Yampolivka, and these are all areas here to the north, Nevska and Makivka. It really is an increase in intensity of fighting along this front line. But yeah, we have Dubrova there. So the claim is that Russian advances northwest of Dubrova. So that would be in this area here. Let's go and have a look. So the 2nd Mechanized Battalion and 67th Brigade fires at Russian positions. So these are Russian positions fired at here. Let's see if the Russian positions have advanced. And we may see a move into the grey zone. Yes, so that is an advance between Dobrova and this sort of Torska salient. So the Russians are in the grey zone there, getting hit by Ukrainian artillery. They could have control over that. It might be a bit early to move control, but that's the sort of thing that Andrew Perpet should be looking out for, and he will change his mapping accordingly. But it could be that we see an increase in Russian territory there, as we have seen here in the Serebyansky forest, and as I say again, Kamenzinivka, Liman-Pashi area, and around Novoselivska. So there are these Russian attacks all along that axis, which is something of a worry for the Ukrainians potentially. The question is why they're doing that, and that's discussed in the Bakhmut section here, which is to say that Ukrainian Ground Forces Commander Syrsky stated that Russian forces are transferring reserves to Bakhmut to stop Ukrainian advances, despite the fact that Russia is concentrating its main forces in the Kupiansk direction. Russian mail blogger claimed that Russian counterattacks made. So this is So Hannah Malyar, the deputy defense minister, stated that Russian forces are panicked at Ukraine's recent advances in the Bakhmut area, and that Russian actions in different directions, particularly Kupiansk direction, are intended to distract and draw Ukrainian forces away from where they're making their advances. And as I discussed yesterday, the question is whether Ukraine will commit forces to these areas from their counteroffensive pots, or whether they just keep it as it is and use maybe there was discussion yesterday about whether it's Home Guard being sent in to support Ukrainian forces in these areas so they don't dip into that counteroffensive pot. But there's certainly an increase in intensity of Russian attacks up and down that front line. I haven't heard anything about Belgorod all the way down really past Sperna to this kind of Vesele area, and not too much about this northern area. So the Ukrainians did make some quite good gains south of Rozdolivka towards Solidar, around Krasnopolivka, and towards Yakovlivka as well. But that was a couple of days ago. Haven't heard much since. There are some claims that rotations are taking place, which will keep the Ukrainians fresh. We know that the Russians are struggling to rotate their troops. Deep State map now is added to this map, as in the recent Deep State in yellow. There is a 48-hour delay, arguably, on their movements. There are a couple of movements of their map around Bakhmut to suggest some Ukrainian gains. Whether that happened yesterday or whether that is a 2-day delay, I don't know. But you can see around this E40 M03 highway coming into the north, a main supply route, or Americans say ground line of communication, into the north of Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians are advancing along that, and there are some gains, very small gains on the Deep State map, which builds on gains that were on the Deep State map there yesterday as well. And you can see the difference. That's 6 weeks of difference, so you can argue that is not a huge amount of distance that they're gained, but they are making these small incremental gains on a daily basis. That is to the north of Bakhmut. Now, there's talk that areas around Orikovo-Vasilivka have been liberated by the Ukrainians. So here, amazing news: the defense forces knocked out Russian positions near Orikovo-Vasilivka in the Bakhmut direction. That's according to the Ukrainian General Staff. In the Bakhmut direction, Ukrainian troops are conducting offensive operations north and south of the city. They had partial success and have fixed. They are fixed at their achieved milestones. At the same time, the enemy puts up powerful resistance, uses reserves, and suffers heavy losses. It says Max 23 in the Bakhmut. Now, I don't know whether knocked out Russians from their positions is exactly the same, just different translation of in the Bakhmut direction. Ukrainian troops are conducting offensive actions north and south of the city of Bakhmut. Also, during hostilities, Russians were forced to retreat, knocked out, forced to retreat from their positions northeast of Orikovo-Vasilivka. So that is northeast Orikovo-Vasilivka. That's going to be around here. So that will fit in line it could be that deep state map that is actually a change that is more current than others we have seen. Then, as we come further to the south, there is still activity around Bakhmut near this reservoir. Potential gains, and this is according to Deep State Map again, and actually it falls in line with the geolocation. So, geolocated footage posted on July the 17th shows that Ukrainian forces advance west of Yahidne. So, Yahidne is this settlement there. Now, I talked about the railway being odd that the Ukrainians have got some purchase along this railway, but the railway does actually split off and go towards the west at some point, and that could be where I'm getting confused and wondering how that has happened. I don't know if that's a railway coming up there. Yes. Could no, that looks like the road. Anyway, I'll have to look into that. But the gains are here. We'll have a look at that. Well, it is from video footage. Now you can see it's actually spliced two lots of stuff going on there. Is it that one? No, it's this one. Two lots of stuff going on here. I don't know where all that is. There's water in the background, so it could be around the same sort of place. Yes, it is actually. So you see this water feature there. These are the Russians hitting the Ukrainians. This gives you a really good sense of where it is there. So there's this straight sort of track going at the base of this water feature. They are hitting all around here as well. So just to give you an idea of where that is the water feature. That is the track going across there. So they are hitting all around here, which means that the Ukrainians are in place in that area for the Russians to be trying to hit them. And that falls in line with what the Deep State Map territorial gain for the Ukrainians suggests. So the Ukrainians have moved into this area there, had some slight gains in the Yahidne area. Right, going back to the ISW. Geolocated footage posted on July the 18th shows that Russian forces advance near Adiivka. So there's a Russian advance according to some other footage. Now, this is one where I don't particularly agree with the ISW here. So they have Russian forces being hit at this location. I have already checked this one. And the location, so this is going to the south. We're now flipping to the south, past Klishchivka. And that is Russians being hit there. Well, that is behind Russian lines, so I don't see how that and they've had this territory for absolutely ages. So there's no conceivable way that can show Russian forces advancing near Ozerenivka. That's simply wrong. But there you go. I don't quite get that. But the Russians are, as according to that footage, they are being hit in places where we'd expect them to be hit. Ahead of a Ukrainian advance in that area. Anyway, Deep State Map has some slight gains for the Ukrainians in Klishchivka. Slightly more positive Klishchivka lines from Deep State than Andrew Perpetua there. And you can see the advance since in the 6 weeks. Fairly significant. It depends what your benchmark is, and some advances up there in the Bakhmut area too. Right, so if we come back to look at some other sources. Situation south of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have advanced into a forest strip southwest of Klishchivka while separately advancing towards Adiivka. The extent of the advance cannot be clarified yet, but there are reports that the Ukrainians have advanced far into both tree lines. Right, so that is to say it's going to be this tree line here, which pretty much already have them controlling, and this one here. I can't see that it's going to be any others unless that I can't work out. That doesn't seem, that's not a tree line. So yeah, I don't understand really where that is going unless there have been counterattacks to take back some of this territory from the Russians, which we know they have been counterattacking in Klishchivka area, as they seem to be everywhere. So retaking some of this, and then the Ukrainians taking it back. So that's no reports comment. So there's grey zone there, which actually, yeah. So that isn't what we've got, because I keep forgetting myself that these lines are Russian defensive lines. they are not where the Ukrainians are up to. So given that's a defensive line, you'll have grey zone here and you'll have solid Ukrainian control back here. And that's exactly what Null Reports has, which is grey zone, Russian solid control back in Klishchiivka, and grey zone elsewhere, and then you have advancing into the tree lines for solid Ukrainian gain within the tree lines there. So yeah, I do take that back. So that's to say that Ukrainians now solidly control this area. But we have had Hanamalia and others saying that the Ukrainians control the heights all around Klishchiivka, all the dominant heights. That was reported again in the ISW. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister says that Ukrainians occupy almost all the dominant heights around Bakhmut. So that'll be north and south of Bakhmut, which is significant for them taking further ground and hammering the Russians with whatever they can hammer them with. And then it's out of Bakhmut, so not a massive amount of news to come out of Bakhmut. So we'll close that down, give my computer a break, and pop down to Adiivka, where south of Adiivka, there's certainly a lot of activity. Adiivka itself, not a great deal to report. Let's go to what the ISW says. So geolocated footage published on July the 18th shows that Russian forces advance west of Marinka. Actually, I'm going to come on to that next after this Krasnohorivka. So there's no information about Avdiivka itself. We are going to come down to this big bit of activity that's taken place at this mine. And then we're going to come on to look at Marinka itself. So this mine, there was a huge Russian attack to take this mine, and they appeared to have taken it, even though people like No Report saying the attack was repelled. It does appear that this is under their control, and there are some claims that they've actually advanced up to a kilometer further. Now, this is really significant because actually this means Krasnohorivka is under threat. This area has been held, as you can see, since 2014. There's a purple 2014 line. This is if this has happened and if Russia does have significant control. I mean, it has happened. They have attacked it, but if they genuinely control that, then this is something of a problem for the Ukrainians. So the ISW says additional geolocated footage published yesterday shows that Russian forces took control of some ground near the Trudovska mine east of Marinka and advanced south of Krasnohorivka. Several Russian mill bloggers claim that a Russian armored group broke through Ukrainian defensive lines near the Trudovska mine area, captured the mine, and advanced 1 kilometer towards Krasnohorivka. One mill blogger claimed that the loss of the mine severely impacts the Ukrainian positions in the Marinka area. I would agree it probably does have some major ramifications. The Trudovska mine area is approximately 2 kilometers away, and the control of terrain lines that have existed since 2014. The 2014 annexation, the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted unsuccessful offensive operations near Avdiivka, Marinka, and Krasnohorivka. So the Ukrainians are saying it's unsuccessful. The video certainly shows that the Russians have attacked it and have been at the mine because it was subsequently bombed with IEDs from drones. Here we can see Global War Monitor saying 2 square kilometers has been added to the occupied territory statistics. So they have that under Russian control. There is a lot of footage coming out of this. Some of it, fairly impressive, high definition footage, although this isn't a great iteration of that. So in this attack, there were several columns of vehicles that attacked towards the mine. The mine was being hit with artillery when the Russians got there. The Russians lost a lot of their vehicles. They lost 4 tanks and a number of infantry fighting vehicles. And once the Russians gained control of the mine, then the Ukrainians went about hitting it with IEDs, dropping IEDs like that on some of the buildings. You've got, destroyed vehicles, plenty of activity there. So it was a really big attack. They basically drove down. I'll see if I can find another bit of footage actually that shows you this. Yeah, I can't really find it. It's another Misha Donbass one, but you see here that you've got this long route up here and here. Basically, the drone footage is from this direction, and you're looking up towards the mine, and you see that this has been mine rolled by a mine roller that then gets blown up right next to the mine, and then the vehicles come up these two tracks. They split into two, and there's a whole bunch going up one and a whole bunch going up the other. Now, they lost a lot of their vehicles, and there's some talk that there was 120 troops used in this exchange, and that they lost maybe 60 of them. But as I said in the news piece, it's not necessarily like a massive concern to the Russians, as in they have taken this, moving up from the east, and they now arguably have control over that. In fact, some of the footage coming out shows that they still have control. This is one that's one of the latest that's coming out, as you can see, the next day, where the Ukrainians are now hitting that. It could be, is that no, that is yesterday. So I don't know. The attack might have been towards dawn then, and then later in the day, that's being hit by Ukrainian artillery. I don't know whether JDAM is involved or anything, but some pretty significant hits on that. But it appears that the Russians do have control over that. So when Null Report says the attack was repulsed by the 79th Air Assault Brigade, if it was repulsed, they wouldn't be hitting the mine, right? If it's repulsed, they're not there. So they are obviously there. It hasn't been repulsed. So I think that is No Reports actually sort of contradicting themselves. But it is, I assume it will be pretty active there today. And then when we come on to look at this, so geolocated footage published on July the 18th shows Russian forces advance west of Marinka. That's this footage here, which is footage, first-person view drone attacking Russian soldiers in this area of Marinka. Well, if they are in this area, then it definitely does show some advance for the Russians, or at least it's very much in the edges of the grey zone. This is quite far from the last lines that we had. Remember, this is Russian defensive line. It doesn't mean that they aren't going to be active here. It means this is grey zone, and they don't, there's no consolidation of this area, consolidation of control. However, that is quite far from their own defensive lines, and them being active there might indicate that indeed they have advanced. I would agree with the ISW there. So that is a worry that the Russians are making these small advances in a number of areas, and in this position, actually, that's not just a small advance, that is fairly significant. They are now how much closer? To almost 2 kilometers closer than they were from their previous front lines. And then that, if they've got another kilometer from there, then that's 2.6. So it's going to be, the idea is that they could be that far. They could be really close to Krasnohorivka. Now, it might not be that last bit is true, that they've got another kilometer further from there, but to have this as a position is going to be very useful. That said, the Ukrainians are going to be absolutely hammering that mine, but there will be safety under the ground, right? Okay, so moving on from that area, we are coming down to the Donetsk front line, which is, if we zoom out here, again, don't hear anything particularly about Vuhledar. Believe that Ukrainians are pushing to the south of Pavlivka. There was talk about Volodymyrivka. I think that's actually mentioned in the Russian Ministry of Defense has claimed that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Volodymyrivka and Urizhny. What amazes me is that so many of these locations along this front line appear to be locations that the Russians are attacking in. So well, let's go through these first in the ISW. Kremlin-affiliated blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are advancing in the Staromyrska area, which we've kind of heard about a lot over the last few days, and they conducted attacks north of Pryutny. A Russian Eastern Group Forces spokesperson said that Russian forces rebelled Ukrainian attacks there, and that the Ukrainian Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attacks in the same direction. And the Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks, Urizhny and Volodymyrivka. Ukrainian general staff reported that Russian forces conducted unsuccessful attacks near Rivnopil and Novodarivka, and in fact, a whole bunch of other places too, where the Russians are attacking, and then claims that Ukrainians are attacking as well. I mean, all sorts of claims going both ways, and it just goes to show that the Russians aren't just sitting there defensively minded in their trenches waiting for the Ukrainians to roll over them. They are actually taking it to the Ukrainians and fighting hard to defend every meter of the area. So yeah, some attacks. We've seen that the Russians have regained this land yesterday, just northeast of Pryutne. So the Russians, so far, still, as far as I know, still in control of that land up to this kind of little rivulet there. But other than that, not a great amount of detail coming out on the front lines about here. If we look at null reports, they say, this is referring to Hanna Malia again, offensive actions continue in the Berdyansk and Melitopol areas. On the directions of Malotokmachka, Novopokrovka, and Velika Novosilka Uruzhina, our defenders were successful. They are taking hold of at the reached boundaries. The initiative is on our side. The enemy's task is to stop our advance, and they put a lot of effort into it. Our enemy is strong, therefore our troops have to move in extremely difficult conditions. In addition, it's necessary to create certain conditions for further promotion, and it takes time. Remember the liberation of Kherson? It was also more than one day. And I said this morning that, this is a problem that Ukrainians face. And General Mark Milley said this yesterday at the conference, the online Ramstein meeting, is that the biggest challenge for the Ukrainians are minefields. So when you go down to look at every single field, all of these fields will be mined. Every single one of these fields, right? There's about 50 fields just there. Then you've got another 50 around here. And then. And this is huge. It's just a massive challenge for moving. And I said this morning, I'm going to repeat myself, that you take out all the Russian soldiers. Imagine all the Russian soldiers suddenly cease to exist, right? The Ukrainians, and assume they can't do it by plane. The Ukrainians have to get all their equipment and troops from here down to Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Crimea. They would still take heaps of time because they'd have to still negotiate all of these minefields. They would still have to clear them to make it safe for their troops to go through, and that's without being shot at the same time. It's just really challenging, and I think it's all going to be about mines going forward. So yeah, I don't know of too much detail going on in that Velika Novosilka salient. Other than what I've already said. It's going to be about Staromilsk. It's going to be about Uruzhiny. And then as we move further to the west, we now come to the past Marfapil, Drozhyanka. We come to the Robotna area south of Orikhiv. And again, this is an area where the Russians had arguably counterattacked, retaking this ground, or Andrew Perpetua was unsure whether actually it was just a bit of a rejig. He says it's a mix of both, probably. And he just focusing on this very particular area near Robotna. I think this mapping is accurate as I can get it. So he's talking about this area to the northwest of here, saying, well, that's about as accurate as he can get it. But actually, this is quite worrying. So this is coming from, and I'm sure this was it mentioned in the ISW, that you've got geolocated evidence, geolocated footage published on July the 17th. So that's 2 days ago, shows that Russian forces made limited gains northeast of Robotna. Right, so this footage is actually quite revealing, and this is good for the Russians, not too good for the Ukrainians. So this is a case of reportedly Ukrainians bombarding the Russians. Now, sorry, the Russians, yes, Ukrainians bombarding the Russians rather than Russians bombarding the Ukrainians. However, if this is the same footage that got Andrew Perpetua confused, it might be the other way round. There still is that option that it's the wrong way round. But in this case, you've got bombarding happening even further to the northwest of where Andrew Perpetua had moved. You know, it was around here before. It's moved to there, and now it's moved to there, and that is really significant. So if these videos really do show the Ukrainians bombarding Russians, then the Russians are a lot further forward than was previously thought. So there's the other one, and there's a third one here. And we'll see where that ends up. Right. And let's go into, sorry, it came out there. And that's even further, right? So that's the furthest one yet. That is a huge difference between what it is. You know, that's 1.8 kilometers. And then from where it was previously, that's like 3 kilometers plus. So if that is the case, then that is really significant. Although that was from 2 days ago, and then was that footage? When was that footage from? So there's just a lot of confusion, and that's kind of what Andrew Perpetua is saying. He's saying just focusing on that particular area near Robrotna, I think this mapping is accurate as he can get it. So where it is at the moment, he's happy, and this is as of last night, really. He's happy that that's where it is. But you can see that it is so difficult trying to get accuracy when there is all these bits of footage. You're not sure when the footage was released. You're not sure who's actually shelling who. It's just difficult. Yeah, Ukrainian forces conducted counter-offensive operations in western Zaporizhia and reportedly made limited advances. So the Ukrainians are making limited advances in places. Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces conducted successful operations in the area we've just been looking at. Russian sources claim that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks north of Robrotna, and the Ukrainian forces hold positions near Orikhiv. That Ukrainian forces previously captured. I presume that is them consolidating their positions. And then as we come out of there, really, there's only the sort of Piatikhatki, Zerebianki area, and nothing about that I can see that leads me to think there's been any changes. There's just no information coming out. There is claim that there, and this is kind of going back to what I was talking about yesterday, that in the Kupiansk area, the Ukrainians are in this grey zone fighting in the settlement there, I think south of the river, and that would indicate some gains, but I haven't heard anything about that in the last 24 hours. Just that was mentioned again by Andrew Perpetua last night. And then nothing to report particularly about the Antonivsky Bridge area. There is, oops, no, not that one. No. So yeah, Antonivsky Bridge is just mentioned a little bit in the ISW. Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces continue to operate, on the left bank of Kherson Oblast, and that Ukrainian forces made limited gains in the area. So there are limited gains apparently. Russian Mill blogger claimed on the 17th that Ukrainian forces made limited gains on the Antonivsky Bridge, and the fighting is heavy and ongoing. So yeah, there is that. Now, the last thing to mention is that there's quite a bit of activity. This is where Heroisky was, where the Bayraktar I talked about, was that yesterday morning, which had munitions on board, MAM L munitions. That came down there. So it's a Ukrainian Bayraktar. At the same time, Ukraine are hitting some targets on this Kherson Peninsula, and one wonders whether that is ahead of anything. So there's all this talk about how there's going to be potentially this attack over the Dnipro from or through Kherson Oblast. Will the Kherson Peninsula be a point where they will try and land significant troops and armor? I don't know. So anyway, that is what has been going on the front line. Please like, subscribe, and share. Let me know what you think. I'm going to do a little bit of analysis of what I think is going on the front line, I think, in my update extra video later, because it is certainly interesting. It's not this big Ukrainian counteroffensive having lots of quick success. In fact, Russia are really making it difficult for Ukraine. Don't underestimate the Russians. There are a lot of Russian troops still, even if they will have low morale, poor equipment, poor training. in many parts, that's not going to be fully representative of the Russians up and down the front line. But there is a certain quality to quantity, as many people say, and they certainly still have a quantity of troops. Anyway, take care. I'll speak to you soon.